Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the Preemie Health Talks. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, CPBF, and your host for this event. The Preemie Health Talks is the first international live series that CPBF is hosting in 2021. These educational sessions are in collaboration with the Family Integrated Care Committee, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, the Canadian Neonatal Network, the European Foundation for the Care of Newborn Infants, EFCNI, and GLANCE, the Global Alliance for Newborn Care. For those not familiar with CPBF, we are a charitable organization, and our mission is to empower families of premature babies every step of the way through support and education. We believe that through consistent information, access to helpful resources, and peer support inside and outside the NICU, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies. For this Preemie Health Talks, we brought health experts from around the world and all over Canada, and we've been diving deep into topics affecting preemie health, from breastfeeding to parental mental health during the pandemic, from the importance of kangaroo care to the best practices to protect your baby's skin. If you need closed captioning, you can watch it live from our YouTube channel and enable closed captioning on the screen. I want to thank our sponsors, Medela, Water Wipes, and Prolacta Bioscience for their ongoing support. Please use your comments area below your screen to ask questions, to share your perspectives, and to share your stories. We'd love to hear from you. And today we're going to have 2 presentations addressing mental health. It's a very important topic for us to be discussing, especially this week that is Mental Health Awareness Week. I have with us here today, Kate Robson, and also Kelly Polci will be discussing trauma-informed care. And right now we're going to talk about foundations of well-being, daily mental health practice for NICU parents. Kate Robson, I'm going to bring her right here on our screen. Kate Robson, a therapist in private practice and a family support specialist in the NICU, will share mental health and wellness strategies for hospitalized families. Being in the NICU can be a traumatic experience for many, and a focus on foundational wellness is a great place to start our healing. Kate Robson is joining us live from Toronto. Both of her daughters were born preterm. One was a 500-gram, 25-weeker born in 2005, and the other came at 32 weeks in 2007. Inspired by her own experiences, she came back to the NICU in 2010 to work with families as a neonatal intensive care unit family support specialist. Since then, she has developed programs for hospitalized families and trained peer counselors across Canada. She went back to school in 2018 to become a therapist, and now has a private practice in Toronto where she offers support to NICU families and clinicians. Kate, thank you so much for joining us here today. Obviously, I love talking to you, and I always learn so much from you. And before you even say hi, there is somebody here on the chat saying that I love Kate Robson.
Oh.
Marsha, we do too. Kate?
Yes. Oh, Marsha, sending so much love back to you. Just love to see your name there. And Fabi, thank you for this opportunity. I love talking with you too, and I love talking about mental health. I think it's so important. I think it's something that we don't talk enough about, and it feels like a real opportunity. So I really want to start with this point of gratitude.
Yes, so for all of you watching us, please, this is going to be a very informal conversation. Send your thoughts, your questions, and we're going to be addressing for the next 40 minutes. So, Kate, let's start with the pandemic and mental health, because obviously the NICU is already traumatic for families in regular circumstances. And now we were adding this extra layer of stress, and it feels that there is no end in sight. So what have you seen over the last year?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think you said it so well. If you kind of imagine a volume dial, right? And it's already stressful and difficult for NICU families. And it's just been cranked right up because they are isolated. The programs that they used to rely on are mostly not, and we can't run those programs. The kind of support that they're offered is limited, and they're cut off from a lot of familial and friend support. So it's a lonely time. It's sort of a chronically lonely and isolated time. And I think people are suffering, you know. I mean, already, you know, the research shows that about in normal times, typical times, about 40% of NICU parents leave the NICU with some kind of mental health issue. And I can only imagine that those numbers are going to go up during the pandemic and after. And something that I've learned, though, that this won't come as a surprise to you, but NICU parents are also very resilient. They are very creative, and they are finding ways of connecting and supporting each other. CPBF, you've been amazing at sponsoring and running this weekly support group that I've been lucky to be a part of. And I'm just so endlessly inspired and blown away by the energy and the spirit of the parents who show up there to help each other. So yes, I think it's a really, really hard time. And I think that we need to start paying attention and talking about it and reaching out and offering concrete support to these families so that the parents and the children won't be too harmed by this strange time.
Absolutely. But you talk about parents, and let's really focus on a little bit on fathers, because we don't talk about fathers' mental health. And we know the number for fathers who experience PTSD after the NICU is much higher. And I don't think we address that enough. What have you seen with fathers during this year?
Well, again, I see that pattern of something that existed beforehand, so it was already often the case for fathers that they were dealing with the trauma of having their baby in the unit, and they were so worried about their partner. And then they were also managing all of the outside world and all those outside pieces. And so now what I'm seeing with fathers is that they're still doing all of that, except they're often, some hospitals are not even permitting, and I hate using that word permitting, but that's the way it's framed. They're not permitting both partners to be at the hospital at the same time. So dads are feeling disconnected because they're the ones often who are still at work and who have to do all that outside piece. And they're being sort of formally disconnected from their baby in the hospital and their partner in the hospital. And what I'm hearing anger, frustration, despair. And I worry about that long-term impact of what patterns are we creating in these families when each partner has to do everything on their own. How are we going to help these families to come back together and work together? So my heart goes out to these parents, and I do think that I understand that COVID is this significant barrier, and I want to be mindful of that. But I want us also to think, those of us who work in NICUs, what can we do to joyfully, meaningfully reunite these families? Because the separation is causing harm, and we need to speak to that.
Absolutely. And obviously, we have been receiving stories from families for the last year. And a lot of fathers haven't, they don't even meet the babies while the babies is still in the NICU, right? Yeah. So a lot of families, we know that the fathers only met the baby after discharge. And yes, as you say, the long-term impact, we don't know how we're going to reconnect, help those families to reconnect and bond with the baby and as a couple, because we know how traumatic it is also for the relationships.
Yeah. Something interesting, at the risk of sounding kind of like Mary Sunshine about something that is very, very, very challenging, but something that I've noticed in the support group and in other conversations I've been having with NICU parents over this year is that there are some aspects to living through a pandemic that NICU parents understand very well. It's almost like we were, pre-programmed to do okay during these challenging times. But I think, that, I wanted to share an image with you actually that I've been using a lot in my private practice and with some of my groups to sort of get across the feeling of not only what it feels like to be in this particular moment, but also to kind of focus our attention on what is possible in terms of this present moment and what can we do, right? And so the image that I wanted to bring up, I'm going to just kind of close my eyes and imagine myself with my feet on the ground, feeling lovely, grounded, and great. And then I open my eyes and I'm not on the ground. I am actually standing on the very, very top rung of a really unstable, think of it like a really rickety old ladder. And I'm high up in the air and I've got nothing to hold on to. And I feel so unsafe. I feel so vulnerable. I might feel angry. Who put me here? Whose fault it is? Is it? I might look for somebody to blame. And every part of my being just wants to be back down on the ground where it's safe. And there's nothing I can do. right? I can't actually get down there because I'm way, way up here. And so what I want us to do is kind of recognize that in the pandemic, like that's where we've been placed, in this traumatic kind of place, right at the top of our nervous system where we're so activated. And it's reasonable for us to want to be back down on the ground like we were before. That may not be available to us right now. What is available to us is that we can use our own knowledge of ourselves, of what calms us, about what helps our nervous systems. And maybe we can just go down 3 rungs on the ladder to a place where we can hold on and we can start feeling like ourselves again. It's not going to erase the trauma. It's not going to make everything better. We're still going to have all the big feelings, but maybe we'll be experiencing them in a way that feels a little bit more familiar, a little bit more achievable, right? And so that's what I've been trying to talk about with families in the NICU, or any family who's struggling, but let's focus for the moment on those families. We can't fix everything right now. So maybe let's put that goal aside. It's okay to want it. It's absolutely okay to want it. But what can we do right now? Can I invite something in that's going to make me feel 2% better? Maybe that's a goal, right? Maybe I can use my knowledge of myself to find something that feels comforting to me. Other people's go-to things might not work for me. It's fine for me to experiment and to try, but I need to really respect the knowledge that I have of myself, right? And what I often invite families to do, if they really don't know, like some people can come to it right, oh yeah, mindfulness, yoga, stretching, calling my grandma, they know exactly what they need in order to just come down that rung or 2. It's harder for other people. There's maybe some people are so conditioned to taking care of others that they don't even know what they like or what makes them feel better. And that's where sometimes we start talking about like the building blocks or the pillars of well-being, right? So we start looking at sleep and movement and connection and nutrition. And we think, is there anything in any of those areas that feels doable to you? You know, and for if there's any NICU staff listening in, these are wonderful questions to ask people. If you notice NICU parents are struggling, you can ask them about these things. How are you sleeping?
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially parents who are pumping, they're not going to get that, fairy tale 8 hours of sleep a night, but can they sleep when they have the opportunity to, right? And I will flag, if somebody says, no, I can't, I lie down and my mind starts racing, that's actually a sign that they might be experiencing postpartum depression. So that would be a great opportunity to invite them, to really encourage them to talk to a social worker or to talk to their family doctor, right?
Yeah, I think that let's talk a little bit about other signs of postpartum depression, because this is, for me, when I heard postpartum depression, I always thought, oh my God, I'm going to just stay in bed. I cannot move. I'm just going to be crying all the time. I did not know that you could still be depressed and you could be still smiling and get up and pump and still go to the hospital. And I think those are the stigma or this idea that we have that depression could look like this, but it actually doesn't. So what are other signs that parents and staff should be discussing or being have the red flags?
Oh, wonderful question. So first off, something I would like to encourage everyone to do, all new parents to do, both parents, mothers and fathers, even though it's the Edinburgh, and if you Google the Edinburgh Depression Scale, you can do it online, and it's sort of written for mothers, but both parents can do it. And that's going to give you a really good snapshot if what you're experiencing is significant, is depression or not. If you are having big sleep issues, if you have no appetite, if you have no interest in any kind of connection with people, that doesn't necessarily mean you have depression or you have PPD but it does mean talk to somebody about it, right? What I would love to normalize is let's talk early and often about how we're feeling, about our mood, right? About whether or not we feel any kind of possibility of joy in 24 hours, right? And if we're not, if everything feels muted, if we feel like we can't take action, or if it's such a battle to take a particular action, let's talk to somebody about it, right? But yes, appetite and sleep, huge flags, really good things to pay attention to. And then obviously, if you have, people will sometimes say, I was imagining what it would be like to be dead. I was imagining that. Am I suicidal? And it's like, no, suicidality is slightly different. But if you are having those really big thoughts, and this is the kind of thing that can be very stigmatized and people do not want to talk about, I really urge you, don't sit alone with those thoughts. There's no shame in having those thoughts. We do not have control over our thoughts and feelings. They're like clouds in the sky. They're going to show up. But they are telling us something. They're telling us that we need to pay attention, right? And they're telling us that we matter and that we deserve to feel better if that's available to us. And they're telling us to talk to somebody, right? So if those big thoughts and feelings show up for you, I don't want you to be scared by them necessarily. I do want you to talk to somebody about them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kate, just adding these comments here. Let's talk early and often about our mood. Love this. Thank you, Sherry, for joining us here. And also, I have a comment from Sarah. We struggled while Lachlan was in the NICU in Barrie. It was only one parent at a time and only once a day. Once you left for the day, you couldn't come back until the next day. Dad and I couldn't spend time together with baby Lachlan. And all on discharge, they were able to be in the NICU together, which was very hard. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. This is becoming for us very often, those experiences. And I think that's why it's so important to acknowledge the feelings in the NICU and certainly discharge. But we're gonna talk about the journey after discharge a little later. I really want Kate to focus on the NICU and what kind of support parents should expect in the NICU or can have in the NICU. And is there a stigma around mental health in the NICU? Because sometimes parents might have a history of mental health issues and they don't want to bring it to the NICU for whatever reason. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just noticing, a wonderful comment from Lori here that I actually think pertains to what you're saying, that a lot of parents and let me say this, I feel this, that, it's very scary when you're in the NICU. And let's acknowledge that for some people, it's scarier than for others. So for me, as a middle-aged white lady in the NICU, I was scared to talk about my, if I say that I'm not coping, are they going to think that I'm not competent? Are they going to call social work in a way? Like, am I going to lose access to my baby? I had those fears. Mm-hmm. Imagine if I were, a young woman of color, a 16-year-old mother. It might be even scarier because, what's going to happen if I say that I'm not coping, right? And so let's take these fears very seriously and let's respect them, because people, NICU parents who are carrying this type of fear, they're not stupid. That comes from a place, that comes from a real place, and we have to honor that. I do think NICU staff members, like I work with such amazing caring staff members, and I think the culture is changing and has changed in many ways. And there's more openness now than ever before to having these conversations with parents and to give, to offer support to parents. Again, our hands are so tied during COVID. There's many resources that are usually available that are not available, but there still are wonderful social workers. There are perinatal psychiatry programs. You can talk to your family doctors as well. But I think what I really want to do is I want to encourage NICU parents to be really brave about this and to talk with the staff and say, I am having a hard time. This is what's going on for me, because I think the NICU staff can be a great resource for you. But I understand that might be hard. I understand that might not be possible for you. And if you can't, okay, then who can you talk to? I just don't want you to be alone with that feeling, because there is always something you can do about it, right? But yes, let's acknowledge that it doesn't feel like a safe place to be for a lot of parents. You're even in single room units, you're constantly surrounded by people observing you, and for some of us that can bring on this kind of need to perform. We don't feel like we're being our authentic selves. That's a hard place to be as well. But I think for NICU parents, less is more, right? That when you're in the NICU, that's not probably the time to do the deep psychological work, like to sort of lie back and, tell somebody all about your parents and there will be time. There's no rush. If you want to do that work, if you want to start looking at your foundational principles and all of that, absolutely, there's time for that. Maybe not in the NICU. Mm-hmm. So in the NICU, maybe what we do is we draw our attention to the small things that can help shift our mood. We draw our attention to grounding exercises that we can do with our breath, with sensory exploration. Maybe we start paying attention to, am I getting enough sleep? What small move, what small tweak can I make to just maybe get an hour's extra sleep a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those are the types of small moves that we can do that are available to us and that can make a huge difference. Yeah.
One thing that when you're talking before that it really struck on me that you talk about the trauma response, right? Because NICU is a traumatic experience, no matter how you experience an ICU. If you're expecting to deliver earlier or not, it is a traumatic. And people have different strategies and different ways to respond to that trauma. And one thing that you said to me is some parents, and I can put myself in that category, are always trying to be happy and pleasant to the staff. So they
yes.
Because when you said that, I think that was my strategy, because I was always like trying to be bubbly, even the bad days. Obviously, I had some really bad days that I was crying, but most of the days I tried to keep chatting with the nurses, with the RTs, and trying to be myself when I wasn't really myself. So that was my strategy. And when you mentioned that before, okay, is that a good thing or is a bad thing?
Oh, I so love that you brought that in. So I'll just give a little bit more, sort of put some landscape around this, that when we talk about traumatic response, one of the ways that we can talk about it, we can look at the classic kind of fight, flight, freeze. And that's what we talk about often. And then the category that you're talking about, I think it's a more recent addition. We talk about fawning. Fawning is that if I'm really, really nice, then I'll be safe here. If I'm really, really nice to everybody, they won't restrict my access. And if I'm a good parent, then the NICU can be a safe place for me. So when you look at this fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, you can see this showing up, you know, for all kinds of parents. So flight, those might be the parents who find it unbearable to come in. They're just not there. Freeze, I was a bit of a fawner and a freezer. Like when somebody asked me to, you know, can you go and do her diaper? I'd be like, I would literally freeze because I was so scared, you know. And the fight might be those parents who can be quite aggressive or argumentative. And I know right now during COVID, that's another thing where the volume dial has been turned way up because people are coming in carrying so much, right? And so you see that it's actually not anger talking. It looks like anger, but it's actually the fear. It is a traumatic response. So I think that the question is it a good thing or not? This is where, and you know, we've talked about this historically, that in our unit, we had a wonderful project related to acceptance commitment therapy, where I learned so much by being involved in this wonderful project, the CSEN study. But really looking at, you know, putting aside the issue of good or bad and looking at, is it working for me or is it not working for me? Is it causing me harm? You know, what is the actual impact within the context of my life, right? So we can have empathy for people who are moving into a fight response. We can also flag that this is not working for you, right? Because you're not necessarily building the relationships you need. It's not making the NICU into a safe place. So can we help you kind of slow your response down so that you're still going to have the feelings, you're still going to have this, you know, really unbearable big feeling of trauma. And can we invite something else into that space? You know, so can you express the emotion in a different way? You know, can you actually acknowledge that what you're feeling is fear and not anger, you know, because it's not workable if you're going around blowing up at people. That's not going to work for you. With fawning, it might be a strategy that is effective. It helps you build relationship. It helps you kind of stay in this place. And then that might be work for you to do personally, thinking about, okay, am I going along with things that I don't actually want to do to make everything nice for everyone else? Is there room for me to get a bit comfortable with being uncomfortable? What would it feel like to say to a healthcare provider who I really care for, actually, it really hurt my feelings when you said this or did this, you know? And if it feels too big to do, that's okay, right? There's time. This is something that maybe you can look at later, you know? But what serves you in the moment, like, let's just be in the moment and say, okay, I really need to feel safe here. And that for me means cultivating these relationships. That's okay. Right? But I love the focus on, is it working for me? And when I'm doing something, asking ourselves this question, what is this in service of? Right? Is it bringing me towards the type of person I want to be? Or is it distracting me from that? Is it distracting me from a feeling that I don't want to have?
Right. So I have a comment here from Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Oh, lovely, Wendy.
I try to support parents by telling them it's okay to cry. This experience is hard. It sucks to be here right now.
Yes.
Talk about crying, because another day, Dr. Michael Narvi also posts about parents crying in ICU, that it's okay. And his post went viral because we don't talk about, it's okay to cry.
Not only is it okay, I think it's important. I think it's vital. And okay, I'm just going to go on a soapbox here, Fabiana. I think there's something really strong in our culture where we've tried to exile sadness. We've tried to exile anything negative. We've tried to exile, anger and all the big, quote unquote, bad feelings. We try and make them go away, but we can't, right? We can't exile them. And when we try to exile them, they're going to come back banging on the door louder than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to figure out a way, how do we kind of invite them back and like sit at the table with us, so that we, crying, for example, when most people cry, when somebody cries, how often have you heard somebody else come up to them and say, oh, no, don't cry. We do this with our children all the time. This is something I'm really trying to hold myself accountable to in the pandemic. My kids get to feel what they're feeling, and I get to keep them company with it and hold them through it. But I don't get to tell them that they're not feeling what they're feeling, right? And I think when we see our friends in distress, we try and say, no, don't feel that way. It's going to be okay. Let's please draw our attention to that, and let's stop doing that. And instead, let's show curiosity to people. Oh, what are you feeling? You're feeling sad. Okay, can you tell me about that? What does that feel like for you? You're feeling angry. Tell me about that. What does that feel like for you? Let's give people space to have their feelings. And it does not,
Sorry, we have to acknowledge those feelings.
We have to let people feel them, because we don't, and this is a central thing in acceptance commitment therapy. All of our lives are going to have pain in them. We cannot live a meaningful, great life without experiencing tough stuff. And so what we have to figure out is, how do we kind of hold the tough stuff with us and still move forward? But we can't pretend that it's not there. And if we do, again, it's sort of like pushing something away until it just smacks you in the face, right? That's what's going to happen. And it doesn't surprise me. Like, I have the privilege of working with Wendy, and she is so loving and wonderful. And I think I so appreciate, Wendy, that your tendency that what you do is support parents and give them space and permission to feel. And you aren't, sometimes when we try and make somebody, oh, stop crying, it's okay. That's actually about our discomfort, right? We don't want them to feel that way. But that if I'm trying to make somebody else feel a different way, that's my problem, not theirs,
So let's talk a little bit about the staff now, because obviously this is also going through a stressful time, right? They work in the hospitals, the frontline workers. It's so stressful for them. They have to go back home. They also have kids at home. They also homeschool the kids, and then they come to work to be in this traumatic environment. So how's the staff, from your experience, doing right now? And is there any support for them? Because I feel they need as much support as the NICU families need at this time.
I kind of don't know where to start in saying this, because I just feel all the things for the wonderful staff members who've shown up at hospitals. Obviously we're focusing on the NICU today, but generally speaking, people in healthcare, what a year, of showing up, of walking into the lion's den day after day. And I think something that happens for NICU staff members generally, and especially now, is that whether or not there's a crisis going on in the unit at any particular moment, they have to be ready for that crisis. So they are often living let's go back to that ladder image. They're right at the top of that ladder all the time. But they have to be ready. They have to be activated and ready to go. It is exhausting to live like that, activated and ready to go all the time, right? And I think culturally, like, we've been terrible with healthcare workers at valuing what they do. We kind of take it for granted. We just, oh, that's your job. Well, think about what it is to walk into that lion's den every day, not knowing what you're walking into, not knowing if when you go home, you'll be taking something home with you that could make your own family sick. That's what healthcare workers have been doing, right? So apart from showing all the gratitude, what can we do? And I think, different hospitals have support programs for staff. I don't know, the difficulty is when you're working these really challenging schedules and nights and going back between night and days, and how difficult that is. I'm glad you acknowledged that so many staff members have their own families and they're trying to homeschool and all that. So it's not that easy for staff members to get support because they don't have any extra time. So that's why, I hope it's okay to say this now, but we are going to be starting a group for staff members in the next couple of weeks. And there'll be anybody who's interested, please look on the CPBF Facebook page for more information. But we're going to be starting a group where we're going to be, each week we're going to be looking at a different tool that we can use, both to help families, but also to help ourselves as caregivers. Because I felt like that's sort of like the least we can do to say thank you to these amazing clinicians and bedside staff who've kept the whole show on the road this whole terrible year.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is certainly a tough year for everyone. And we just want to acknowledge and thank them for all the work that they're doing. If you are a healthcare professional listening to us today, we are very grateful for all the work that you do for our families every single day. Kate, as you talk about our programs, let's talk a little bit about the COVID care program that you're before you go into talk about after discharge and mental health.
Yeah, well, so that was another thing that, I think, and this very much speaks to who you are, Fabiana, that you are very much a let me help type of person. So I think when COVID, I know CPBF did so much great work helping, hospitals run support groups across the country. And then COVID happened and all of those support groups kind of fell like dominoes because you couldn't do anything in person. And so you immediately pivoted to offering something online. And we've had this lovely online support group going now for more than a year. And it's become this really beautiful community where we support each other. The parents who show up each week, they're so amazing. They have so much insight. And it's become a really lovely kind of mutual support community. And then we've also recruited clinicians across the country to be available for counseling sessions with NICU families. So whether you're still in the NICU or whether you've been recently discharged. So I would really encourage parents, if you would like to talk to somebody, there are people there for you. It's free. You can get 4 sessions now. And so reach out, don't hesitate and I think some people, they're kind of like, oh, it's therapy. What is that? You know what? It's connecting with somebody. It's talking about what's going on with you. It can be fun. In the sessions, we often laugh. We explore, different strategies for sure. But the sessions can be really enjoyable too. So if you're feeling any kind of nerves about it, you can also try one. And if it's not for you, you don't have to come back. But I would really encourage people, if you think that it would benefit you to talk to somebody and you qualify into the program, please try us out because I think you might like it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to put our website here if people want to look it up. CanadianPreemies.org is under resources and is under COVID-19. So we have all the programs listed there.
Yeah. I'm just noticing Sarah's beautiful comment.
Yes, I'm going to put it right here. I felt as though being a nurse myself, it helped me get along with the nurse in the NICU as well. You're able to connect on a different level. When you spend so much time in the NICU, the staff become your family as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful parts of the NICU. You think there's that lovely saying, it takes a village, to raise a child. And then it's like, oh yeah, those wonderful people in the NICU, they were my village, so grateful. And we kind of used to joke with some of the nurses that, they were like fairy godmothers and, but they really were, and those friendships, those relationships, they continue to matter. Absolutely. So I hope that's something that, and if there's any NICU staff members listening today, please know how much you matter. Please know that your loving care, that your bravery, your courage in showing up every day, even in these circumstances, that it makes a lasting, wonderful difference in other people's lives.
Absolutely. Kate, let's talk a little bit about discharge. So we left the NICU and the journey is not over. Actually, we're starting a new chapter on that journey. So let's talk about the experiences after discharge, the expected feelings and emotions that will surface after the baby goes home.
Yeah. What I think surprises many, not all, but many NICU families is that, because discharge is sort of like this carrot in the NICU, like discharge day, I can't wait. I'm so excited. And then you go home and it's just you. And you're kind of like, where is everybody? And especially now in COVID, when there are no drop-ins and you sometimes can't see family, after discharge, it can be really lonely. So it's this thing that you longed for. And there's so many wonderful things about it, getting to be in your own home. And, I remember kind of like gleefully, like not taking my baby's temperature 5 times a day anymore. And haha, I don't have to do this. That felt good. But it was lonely. And I was scared, and I think for me, like in the NICU, you're busy. There's always people around. There's someone to talk to. There's always stuff to do. You're pumping, da, 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 da. You're busy, busy, busy. You get home and all of that kind of falls away. And sometimes that's when it really lands on you. And this is when it lands for dads too. Dads really experience a lot of depression well after, like after discharge, because you realize we got so close to the fire. We could have been burned up. And so the reality of what almost happened to you and this beloved baby, that's when it lands. And sometimes the wheels can fall off, right? We think, oh, we're going to get through the NICU and everything's going to be fine. But then you get home and that's when you notice I'm not feeling like myself, right? That's what, if I can share, that's what happened to me. I didn't talk to anybody about it because I had so normalized that high level of anxiety and sadness. And it was years before I was able to put a name to it. Oh, I was experiencing postpartum depression and anxiety, right? But so that's what I want for parents when you get home, and congratulations, like what a milestone. And it is something absolutely to celebrate. And if you also notice that you're not feeling like yourself, that's okay. Talk to somebody about it, okay? Because there's so much that you can do, right? You can do talk therapy. You have tools in your toolbox. But it's great to talk to somebody to really figure out what tools are going to suit you.
Absolutely. And these are very important tips for parents, because sometimes you're just trying to get through the day, try to get some sleep, get some food, and you forget to deal your emotions, right? So you keep it bottling up until one day you can not do anymore. So I think it's very important to be aware of those feelings and the emotions that are surfacing, and talk to somebody about it. And now, unfortunately, everything is remotely, but there are supports available. And for people who live in rural areas, remote areas, there is access to online stuff now that is so important.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird kind of bright side of this thing, that some types of care are more accessible than ever before. And people were kind of loath to embrace online therapy, for example. But now I've been delivering therapy online for a year, and I actually like it. You get to meet people's babies, and you get to meet their cats and their dogs, and it's actually really lovely.
You go to people's living room now.
Yeah. Yeah, and people can feel very comfortable in their own homes. So it really does, especially if you have babies, who wants to get all, piled up into a car to go talk to somebody? Now you can just push a button and you can be connected. And I think the other thing that sometimes, for parents, there is this feeling like, oh, it's just me and I just need to push through and da 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 da. We somehow don't feel that we are worth doing something for, doing like a hard thing for. And so part of me would really like to dig into that belief with you. I don't mean you, Fabi. I mean the sort of imaginary parent we're talking to right now at home. But I also want to say that taking care of yourself explicitly and openly is actually a wonderful thing to model for your kids. So if you can't do it for yourself, maybe you can do it for your kids, to show them that, hey, it actually matters when I get up and exercise. It makes me feel better. Because you can tell a kid anything. It's what you do that's actually going to teach them something. So if you want your child to grow, I think we all want our children to grow up being people who take care of themselves and pay attention to their mental health and their physical well-being. Okay, so we have to show them what that looks like, right? So we have to show them that if you're feeling down, you talk to somebody. So if I'm telling my kid to do that, but I'm not doing it myself, they would rightly call me out as a hypocrite. So I'm trying to be very open with my kids about, yes, I'm going to exercise every morning. And yes, I talk to a therapist and I love it, and yes, I talk to friends. I even have my own sensory kits, right? I mean, we talked about this before, but
yes,
yeah, I have these perfume samples, right? And again, these are just micro moments, but if I'm feeling a little stressed, if I'm feeling a particular way, I have all these things that I can bring in, like little kind of like massage things, this nice little thing that's kind of nice in the back, perfume, whatever. These are things that I like. Other people will like different things, like having like their favorite mints nearby. But let's look for those micro moments. Again, thinking of that ladder, what helps me just feel that little bit better? But let's do it explicitly in front of our kids so that they know what we're doing, because that's how they're going to learn to take care of themselves as well.
Well, and acknowledge the feelings, because yesterday actually I was talking to my son who loves video games, and every night to try to get off the video game, and I was angry. He said to me, "What's wrong with you?" Because I cut off time, and I say in a nice way, and he's like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm not feeling great right now. I'm anxious. I'm tired. I need to go to sleep." He came and gave me a hug. Right. And I think acknowledging that and let your kids know, yes, we also struggle some days. And some days they're not easy. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right? And then I think you help them build compassion, also help them to express their feelings. From my experience as a mom of a 12-year-old boy today, and my preemie 8. So I think it's a journey that we learn along the way, but having those tips that you share with us, it's so important. So I want to share this comment here because we're almost at time, from Lisa. No way you could have got through our 3 months in ICU stay without our primary care nurses, Anne and Wing, and social worker Kelly. When our families couldn't be with us in person, they really stepped up and made personal connections that were missing during, I think the comment is Doug, but I guess during her NICU stay, the comments cut off.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you, Lisa, because you said it so perfectly, that the NICU staff, you are filling such an important, you are a puzzle piece that is essential. Your connection. Yes, you take care of our baby so beautifully, and we appreciate that, but you also take care of us. You're there for us emotionally. And this is just for the staff members who are listening. Please know that you are so important and that you deserve to be taken care of too. It's really, really important.
Okay, Kate, we're almost at time. I'm sharing here your website. If people want to get in touch with you or book some sessions with you, and also remind the families and the staff in our audience here, Facebook and YouTube, that we do have a program that is free for families. And one of the therapists is Kate, and another psychologist in Ontario who was also a preemie mom. And you have other psychologists across Canada to really support the families. So, Kate, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
I'm going to put you in the spot. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to you for showing up so consistently for babies and families and clinicians across this country. It's not easy, but at a time when it would have been very understandable for just like, oh, there's not much we can do. You didn't shut down. You went all in. And I'm sure it's been hard. But it's, something I tell people, I talk to NICU parents about sometimes that, and again, it's not meant to take away any of the tough stuff, to make everything okay, but I want to recognize that one thing, like when we go through something really hard, something really tough, like this pandemic, like having a baby in the NICU, and when at the end of it, we don't need, like, perfection isn't the goal. We can make all kinds of mistakes. But if we were able to show up as ourselves, true to our values, then we know something really powerful about ourselves. We know that we can do something really, really hard. We've been tested, and now we know something. And that knowledge is amazing. And I think I look at you and think about how you've been able to show up for your community during this pandemic. And it's like, I hope you already knew that you were amazing and that you could do tough things. But wow, here's some more proof.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. But obviously, I don't do this work alone. There's a lot of people who are full of passion that support CPBF, and you are one of them. So it is a team effort. And I always think about what comes out of what we consider tragedy in our lives. It comes, I think, a deep sense of purpose, and we purpose our lives to give back to this community. And so many of us doing this work. And obviously, you are my mentor, and you guide me on this journey. And I'm so grateful to you. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Okay, so I see you soon, Kate, and
bye, everybody.
Thank you. And for all of you watching us live on Facebook and YouTube, thank you so much for joining our conversation. We'll be back in just a few minutes with Kelly Polci talking about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed care plans and how to incorporate this tool in the NICUs. I want to thank our sponsors, Medela, Water Wipes, and Prolacta Bioscience for their ongoing support. CPBF is a registered charity, and 100% of all donations received this week will go to our support programs for families, including the programs that Kate mentioned today. And to donate, please go to CanadianPreemies.org. Stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And if this is your first session of the day, welcome to the Preemie Health Talks. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, CPBF, and your host for this event. The Preemie Health Talks is the first international live series that CPBF is hosting 2021. These educational sessions are in collaboration with the Family Integrated Care Committee, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, the Canadian Neonatal Network, the European Foundation for the Care of Newborn Infants, EFCNI, and GLANS, the Global Alliance for Newborn Care. For those not familiar with CPBF, we are a charitable organization, and our mission is to empower families of premature babies every step of the way through support and education. We believe that through consistent information, access to helpful resources, and peer support inside and outside the NICU, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies. For this Preemie Health Talks, we brought health experts from around the world and from all over Canada. We've been diving deep into topics affecting preemie health, from breastfeeding to parental mental health during the pandemic, from the importance of kangaroo care to the best practices to protect your baby's skin. If you need closed captioning, you can watch it live from our YouTube channel and enable closed captioning on the screen. I want to thank our sponsors, Medela, Water Wipes, and Prolacta Bioscience for their ongoing support. And please, if you have comments, questions, or want to share your stories, please use the comments on the box below the screen. So we just talked to Kate Robson about Foundations of Wellbeing, the NICU. If you missed that session, it is available on our YouTube channel. And next week, all the videos from this week's sessions will be on our website. And right now, we're going to talk about maternal mental health, incorporating trauma-informed care in the NICU. In this talk, Kelly Polci will be asking us to take some time to acknowledge World Maternal Mental Health, which was yesterday. How do we celebrate and carry forward this important cause in a COVID world? Secondly, she'll talk about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed care plans. And I'm bringing Kelly right here to our screen. Kelly, let's unmute you. And Kelly Polci is a Toronto-based psychotherapist in private practice and a social worker practicing at the Hospital for Sick Children. She only recently moved to Sick Kids after 11 years in the Women and Babies program at Sunnybrook Health Science Center. Within their role, she supported hundreds of women and families navigating high-risk pregnancies in the NICU and all the grief and trauma those experiences can bring. Kelly work includes areas of clinical passion and additional training centered around perinatal bereavement and parental mental health. In addition to her master's, she seeks out training on evidence-based therapeutic modalities such as interpersonal psychotherapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and emotionally focused therapy. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Oh, thanks, Fabiana. I'm just so happy that I could be a part of this, and loved everything Kate had to say before me. So
yes, let's continue this conversation because it's such an important topic to talk about, bring awareness about maternal and parental mental health. So I know you have a presentation to share with us. I will let you share your screen. Okay. And for all of you watching us, you can send your comments and your questions to Kelly. We're going to address after her presentation.
Okay, see if I can figure this out. So I'm trying to share.
Okay, you go on share and then share screen, and then there's application window. Your PowerPoint should be there.
Do you see it?
I have a backup here.
Okay.
I always have a backup.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm getting this right. Sorry, I don't think
No, Kelly, I can share my screen, and then you just let me know when to move the slides.
Okay, thank you so much, Fabiana.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to talk, first of all, hi, everybody. It's so fun to see familiar names in the comments section. I'm Kelly, and as Fabiana said, I'm a social worker and psychotherapist. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Kate. Hi, Wendy. So I'm going to firstly talk about World Maternal Mental Health Day and some of the ways in which that's being celebrated this year. And then I'm going to talk about one vision that I have for this wonderful day and wonderful cause of maternal and parental mental health, really, which is to incorporate trauma-informed care and trauma-informed care plans into the NICU. So next slide, Fabiana. So World Maternal Mental Health Day was started in 2015 and 16. So it's a relatively new day, interestingly, and it falls on the first Wednesday in May so as to come close to Mother's Day. This is a voluntary group that was started by a bunch of international partners, including academics, activists, and people with lived experience of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And the objectives and goals of this organization are quite simple. They're to raise awareness regarding this topic, increase treatment access, and decrease suffering. They're also interested in looking at influencing policy. So one of the policies that, or a sort of realms of policy that they're interested in looking at is around infanticide and how to reduce some of the criminality that surrounds infanticide, given that it's often coupled with postpartum psychosis. And it's also looking at reducing stigma. Their other messages that they want to further are that no one is immune and that this illness crosses lines in terms of culture, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and much more. World Maternal Mental Health Day, if you go to their website, you'll see that they have started a petition and they are looking for the World Health Assembly and the UN World Health Organization to officially recognize World Maternal Mental Health Day. Other messages that the initiative wants to sort of share widely are that there's no health without mental health and that the mother's health is the family's health. And I think we can all agree to that. Next slide, Fabiana. The theme of World Maternal Mental Health Day this year is Let's Invest, a call to action for investment and equity in maternal mental health care. And then you'll see the statistic here that is, again, from their website, around 75% of women suffering do not get diagnosed or do not receive adequate treatment. So a huge element of the World Maternal Mental Health Day initiative is a campaign on social media with the hashtag #MaternalMHMatters. They have a Twitter and Facebook account, and it's really about, broadly sharing the message. I just want to quickly make note of the reference to equity in this year's theme. And I mean, as Kate made note of in her presentation, and if we look specifically at the NICU experience, but also just the experience of parenting in general, this is not the same experience for those of us that are in more privileged social locations. And so while the statistics around perinatal mood and anxiety disorders for women are 1 in 5, the statistic for women of color is 1 in 3. Women will be afflicted with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. I'm going to start using the term PMADS that refers to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, just because that's a wee bit of a mouthful. Next slide. So some events that have been taking place this year for World Maternal Mental Health Day are some virtual symposiums. So as Fabiana mentioned, that was yesterday, was the actual day. But in a lot of locations around the world, you'll note that this is really a week, and in some cases even a month of celebration. So just because we're having this conversation a day late, it really doesn't matter in any way. So there was a virtual symposium yesterday, however, that did take place in Canada, and this was put on by the Ludmer Center as well as the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative. And if you're a practitioner that's listening in, I would encourage you to look up the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative. This is an initiative started by a Simcoe-based practitioner that I know. Her name is Jamie Charlebois, and she's a real champion for this cause, and often has a lot of great resources on the topic. And so this organization is looking for the federal government to create a national strategy on perinatal mental health. And in addition to the Canadian symposium, there were other symposiums all over the world. And I really want to highlight that this topic is really broad reaching, and that obviously the people that are championing this are doing a really great job, because these symposiums are happening in the UK, in Israel, Puerto Rico, Malta, Indonesia, Turkey, I want to say, was on the list. I mean, really all over the place. So it's wonderful. And then there's an organization that some of you will be familiar with called Postpartum Support International. I'm a big fan of this group and all of the free online support groups that they offer. And they have a campaign called the Climb Out of Darkness campaign. And so these are often community stroller walks. And there's one actually upcoming in the Waterloo region on June 26th. And this is one of the largest, if not the largest, fundraisers for parental mental health in the world. And then another initiative I came across in my research for this presentation was, again, another social media campaign put out by an organization called the Blue Dot Project, and it's hashtag Making Over Motherhood. And this is encouraging mothers to share real and sort of unfiltered experiences of motherhood, so that we can just, again, start normalizing sharing all facets of this experience. Next slide, please. So this slide, really, I'm just asking any practitioners that are listening in now or at a later date to reflect on the topic of World Maternal Mental Health and parental health in general, and reflect on what your organization is doing to champion this cause. I think we all know the statistics around how mental health has been affected by COVID. And I think, some of the organizations I mentioned today, they offer great trainings that practitioners could take. Perhaps you could bring a speaker in, and really there's a great opportunity to be creative in how we acknowledge this in our institutions. Next slide, Fabiana. Okay, well, this is the part of my talk that I was really, if I'm being honest, a bit more excited to talk to you guys about today, and that is the concept of incorporating trauma-informed care in the NICU. So trauma, which again, I mean, Kate really touched on the topic of trauma as well, and I think, broadly, it's defined as an emotional response or reaction to a terrible or distressing event, either that occurred directly to you or that was witnessed. So a trauma event is often typically characterized by a lack of control, vulnerability, helplessness, as well as any issues of communication. And that's certainly a theme that I saw in my work as a social worker in an NICU, that trauma experiences are often amplified if at any time the victim or the traumatized party feels any sense of being dismissed, unheard, or unsupported. So trauma-informed care is an evidence-based and strengths-based approach that recognizes and centralizes the impact of trauma. It prioritizes the physical, psychological, and emotional safety of people who are experiencing the trauma. And it looks for opportunities to rebuild and shift the locus of control back to the traumatized party. So, I mean, when I say the traumatized party, you can safely assume that in this case, I'm referring to an NICU parent. Next slide. So this is a bit busy, but I kind of went through my own mental checklist and tried to reflect on all the different sources of trauma that are specific to NICU. And I won't read this out, but give you each a chance to look at it quickly.
Kelly,
yeah,
you want to mention some out loud would be great, because we have closed captioning going on YouTube.
I apologize. Of course. Thanks, Fabiana. Yeah. So, the high-risk pregnancy, the transport to the hospital, blood, needles, interventions. I mean, I want to just stop and even mention the hospital in general. Like, some people really strongly dislike or even have a phobia surrounding a hospital environment. Yeah, sights, sounds, sensations. I mean, I think this is going back to what Kate was talking about in her presentation about how sensory and how sensory trauma is. And so I'm just referring to sounds like the sounds of a monitor beeping, the sounds of people talking, interventions taking place, nurses talking. Sights might be the bright lights of an OR, and of course, your baby, and so much more. And often when we're in the midst of trauma, where we might have a lack of orientation to time and space or person. And so even, the most unexpected things might be salient in our mind as we experience a trauma. So, what you'll find in speaking to NICU parents is that sometimes it's a rather seemingly unusual or insignificant type of thing that's really salient to them about what was traumatic. Maybe like something that was posted on a wall, or yeah. So here's a long list of sources. I mean, they say, one of the quotes that you often see in the trauma literature is that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that's absolutely true, in that we each process and appraise life experiences differently. But I also think that as we look at this list, it would be safe to argue that NICU experiences are trauma experiences for many, many people. And this is not a comprehensive list. As I said, this is a list that I just kind of was able to pop off. But I think there's much else you could put on here in terms of what led up to this event, in terms of years of infertility or other losses. Scanxiety is a term I came across in the literature, which I really thought was well said, and that is sort of the anxiety we experience when awaiting results. And then on the side there, you'll see I kind of put what else, and that's referring also to the concept of complex trauma, and that's to say that some of the people that experience NICU might have long-standing or pre-existing trauma experiences. They might have had something, again, that's really commonly discussed in the trauma literature, which is, adverse childhood events, or ACEs, as they're often called. And so we're looking at the accumulation of multiple trauma experiences. And then we'd be remiss not to mention the additional element of COVID and what it's been like for families to navigate this during COVID. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I did want to add to that last slide, actually, like what, again, sorry, Kate, I keep talking about you. I obviously love you. What Kate was saying in her talk was around the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And those are sort of responses to any sense of distress or responses to trauma. And so that's what comes of these sources. And I really loved the reference to the fawning and the sense that sometimes being a parent in the NICU is almost a performative act. You're really trying to navigate becoming a parent in a bit of a fishbowl. And you see the parents sometimes dancing between the different reactions. So they might fawn sometimes and freeze sometimes, or fawn sometimes and fight sometimes. And it's very well evidenced in my experience. Okay. Next slide. So this is a great Instagram account for those of you on Instagram, and it's called @DearNICUMama. I'm not sure if anyone else is familiar with them, but they've got lots of great supportive messaging for an NICU parent who's, currently living through that experience or who has lived through that experience. And this just is some further validation of how traumatic an NICU is. So some quotes that are listed here are that there's nothing that can prepare you for seeing your baby fight or the ache you are left with as you leave them at hospital at night. There's nothing that prepares you for the pride you will feel when they gain another ounce or drink another milk. There's nothing that prepares you to see intensive care written on the wall. And there's a few others listed here, but I'm just really trying to reinforce and deeply validate all the trauma that our families are dealing with. And I think as practitioners, when this is your day-to-day, we sometimes normalize sometimes we don't deeply absorb all the details that these families are navigating and all the trauma, because we're used to seeing stories that have so many traumatic details to them, it becomes a bit normalized. Next slide. So looking at the sources of trauma that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, we will see the residual impacts of this in our NICU population. And so trauma will manifest through behaviors and emotions that we see in the NICU. And it is my hope that we can not pathologize that, and that we can see every behavior as a communication of trauma. And so behaviors, which, I'm not a huge fan of even saying that word, but behaviors like avoidance, panic, hypervigilance, anger, issues with bonding, guilt, and of course the teariness and emotionality, rigidity or control seeking. So like sometimes maybe even an inflexibility. These are all communication of trauma and valid, appropriate responses to such. So the shift when we look at trauma-informed care, and this, interestingly, my friend Oprah recently, she's my friend because I love her, recently talked about this, is that instead of seeing behavior and thinking what's wrong with you, we look at behavior and say, what happened to you? And it's so often in the NICU, we already have the answer, but we might lose sight of it. So that's why I really want us to just constantly go back to not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. Next slide. So a huge part of trauma-informed care that we would be providing to NICU families is to manage our own trauma and burnout as practitioners. So as Kate so eloquently put, and I want to reiterate that providers, you, we, us, they, you're witnessing all the stuff that I've mentioned over the course of the slides around sources of trauma in the NICU. And so there's this constant cumulative buildup that we experience when we're immersed in that. And so that can lead to burnout or vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. And so one of our ultimate obligations as practitioners is to try and stay in the place of deep and consistent compassion. And in order to do that, we need to be managing our own self-care and burnout. And so I want to just quickly ask each of you to reflect, regardless of whether you're an NICU practitioner or someone with lived experience in the NICU, to reflect on what are the signs for you when you're burnt out. I'm going to give some examples of signs just to encourage you to brainstorm, and I'm really encouraging you guys to take some time to self-reflect on the topic of what my burnout looks like, and then of course thereafter looking at what can I do about it and what am I doing to address it, because that's really foundational to trauma-informed care, and I'll explain that more in the next slide. But just some examples of what burnout how it might show up for you are, back pain, teariness, overthinking, a lack of productivity, upset stomach, poor sleep, headaches, increased conflict with our spouse, less compassion for patients and families, seeing everything through a negative lens, drinking too much, and the list goes on. Next slide, Fabiana. So a concept that is really big in the trauma literature is that of co-regulation. And so the concept of co-regulation is that as a practitioner, we're obligated to model a calm and regulated state. And that can be done through warm and responsive interactions. And that in and of itself can be really helpful in supporting our families. So it's the idea that there's a feedback loop between my nervous system as a practitioner and the nervous system of the families I'm working with. And so we're co-regulating. Again, so we are working on our own burnout. We are taking the steps necessary to address our own burnout so that we can engage with our families in a calm and regulated way. And this is also a really big concept in the parenting world. I'm not sure if anyone's heard the quote, when dealing with a toddler who's having a huge tantrum, and they talk about, don't join in their chaos, but model your calm. So in summary, caring for yourself as a practitioner is not an aside to trauma-informed care. It is the work of trauma-informed care and allows for successful exchanges with families. Next slide. So now this concept of a trauma-informed care plan. So a trauma-informed care plan is an individualized plan that would be used with each family that you work with in an NICU. So I would propose that this is something that could be created perhaps within a week of admission, and it needs to be done collaboratively with the family. And it's probably a living document that would be edited over time as you move through the different stages of the NICU. And I hope it could be even posted on the wall in each family's room or in the chart as an alternative, so that there's no obligation on the family to provide any handover on this plan and or any obligation on the staff. So I've seen trauma-informed care plans, and that's how I became kind of excited and passionate about the concept of them, used on an antepartum floor in my old gig at Sunnybrook, as well as on a labor and delivery floor. And I've seen them used with great success. And that's why I'm proposing that they could be brought to the NICU. So the 5 concepts of a trauma-informed care plan are safety. So an awareness of that family's safety as well as sources of discomfort. Transparency and trustworthiness. So providing full and accurate information about what's happening and what might happen next. Choice, the need to approach and recognize, the need for an approach that recognizes individual needs and preferences and offers options. Collaboration and mutuality, which acknowledges that healing happens in relationship. I think that really goes back to my co-regulation comment. And encourages us to look for opportunities for shared decision-making. And lastly, empowerment. So recognizing individuals or families' strengths and harnessing those strengths in the NICU. And interwoven throughout any trauma-informed care plan is, again, that concept of co-regulation, as well as lots of active listening, deep compassion, and validation of an emotional response. So that's, again, looking at what Kate was saying and encouraging us to not try to fix negative behaviors or really trying to work through any discomfort we have with any negative or, intense emotional responses, and instead being curious about that and being validating of it. And another theme that you'll see in any trauma-informed care plan is the importance of consistency. So consistency in the care team and a concept in the NICU of primary nursing and a primary care team. I think that is also pivotal, in reducing trauma, but also in having a successful plan. Next slide. So I thought the best way to demonstrate what a trauma-informed care plan is to provide a bit of a case example. So this is a fictional couple, but one that from my own experiences in a NICU, has a lot of kind of familiar details. So Jane and Mark have struggled for 5 years to get pregnant. Jane has had 2 miscarriages. This pregnancy was high risk. Jane had a subchorionic hemorrhage in first trimester. In second trimester, she had 2 admissions to an antepartum unit with incompetent cervix. She was discharged home each time and encouraged to be on bed rest and on leave from work. On June 15th, at 25 and 5 weeks gestation, Jane began to feel cramping. The couple was rushed to their local hospital, a level 2 facility. Jane delivered the baby at this facility. The couple was told that given baby's gestation, there will be longer-term impacts and developmental challenges that could range from mild to severe. They were also told that their baby would have to be transferred to another hospital located 1.5 hours from their home and has level 3 care, and that this would be happening shortly after birth. So I've just written here, can you imagine being Jane and can you imagine being Mark? And just asking us each to try to get into their shoes. And for some people that are listening in, I'm sure they've been in shoes quite similar to this. So again, this is a familiar type of story for those of us who come from a level 3 environment and even level 2 environments. I mean, you would have seen stories of this nature many times. And I think that I just want to reiterate that sometimes when you're seeing stories like this, they become a bit normalized for you as a practitioner. But if you scan this case example, I think you could probably find at least, I'm going to venture guess, probably 10 sources of trauma for this family. And so then we could just keep throwing in additional details, pepper this with a few more things like, it's COVID, or this family has other kids at home and no family nearby to support those kids. Or, Jane has a pre-existing history of depression. I mean, often there's also more to these stories than just the actual NICU event. Next slide. So this is a bit of a busy slide. I apologize, but I'll read it to everybody. So as it relates to safety, here's an example of what a trauma-informed care plan might indicate. So Jane doesn't like to learn things when she gets to the hospital. She calls for a morning update, and then she lets the team know what her plans will be in terms of coming to the hospital that day. She asks that if anything changes between the two, she is contacted. She asks that we contact her cell phone as the first point of contact. Jane is more introverted, and she is still processing multiple losses and lots of grief. When she cries, which is often, she prefers to have space. She does not want to talk about it right away. A statement like, "I'm here if you want to talk," will be sufficient. Mark likes procedures to be explained in great detail before they happen. Transparency and trustworthiness. Jane and Mark will try to come to rounds, but also appreciate a daily bedside update from the NP and the RN. Again, Mark tends to prefer more details and will often need to know the reasoning behind things that happen day to day in the NICU, even seemingly small things. He will become agitated if he feels that those questions are not being answered. Mark would like head ultrasound results, even insignificant ones, as soon as we have them. He does not wish for us to wait until the couple is next visiting the hospital. Mark also likes people to introduce themselves and their role. He gets overwhelmed by the large team. Choice. Jane and Mark try to come every day at the same time, but they can't always do so. They both like to KC a lot. It helps when they have choice regarding the timing of that kangaroo care. Jane wants to participate in care, but is also sometimes nervous. She likes to be offered the opportunities, but also does not wish to be pressured. If you tell Jane she cannot participate in a certain care task, it helps for her to know why. Mark likes to present on rounds. Collaboration and mutuality. Jane and Mark are the experts of their own needs as well as their baby's temperament. Jane thinks that the baby loves music, prefers to be on his left side when sleeping, and loves his soother. Jane hates eye exams. She wants Mark to be present for them and for any and all available comfort strategies to be employed. When immunizations come up, Jane asks that an eye exam and an immunization not happen back to back. Empowerment. Mark loves to joke. He does well with nurses that like to socialize. Jane is an avid cyclist, yogi, and reader. Learning about her strengths reminds her that she has strengths that she can tap into. Furthermore, given her love of reading, Jane will often benefit if we give written information about key NICU topics. So I hope that in showing this example, and I mean, it's just one example, you can start to maybe reflect on what your trauma and informed care plan might have looked like when you were in the NICU, and or what some of the families you work with as practitioners might have put in their plan. And so, as I said, again, this is developed collaboratively with the family. And it might be hard for the family to self-identify some of this stuff, especially if we're looking at stuff that they can't really anticipate because it hasn't ever happened to them before. So it would be helpful for us to have a bit of a list of examples of different things that might come up so that we could populate this document. And again, it would be a living document that could change over time. But I hope that in showing this example, you can see how the locus of control shifts more to the family, and that it also is almost like a narrative for the family. And so they're sharing their story, their strengths, their likes, their dislikes, their triggers, and their preferences. And it really sort of centers that and gives them some of that power back. Next slide. So that's really kind of brings me to the end of my presentation, and sort of just some conclusion points that I wanted to make is that I want us as practitioners to look at all behavior. Again, I'm struggling with the word behavior, but looking at all actions, I guess, in the NICU as through the lens of trauma. If you're a practitioner, prioritizing your own self-care and self-reflection is the most important piece of trauma-informed work. And that allows you to be regulated, warm, and responsive. And lastly, I'm asking that we consider the concept of trauma-informed care plans in our NICUs as an opportunity to shift control and improve communication with our families so as to minimize their distress. And that's all.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Oh my God, I learned so much about trauma-informed care. To be honest with you, I didn't know much about it. I really appreciate all that you share with us. And I think I share the same thoughts with Lisa. She said, I love this. And I want to also thank Yvette from joining us from Portugal. Somebody from Mexico is here. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here today. Kelly, very important conversation, especially this week, on Maternal Mental Health Day yesterday, as you put all the events that are happening to raise awareness and the stigma and really support families and get them to the resources that they need. So my question to you is, this trauma-informed care plan, it is something that every family in the NICU should receive, or some specific families who you already know there is some history there, or families will have a long NICU stay?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think with anything like this, you have to reflect on the feasibility. I think always we want to capture as many people as we can, but realistically in practice, that's not always possible. I know that at Sunnybrook, where I was working, there was a lot of focus on micro prems and having a family meeting within the first week of admission with any of our micro preemies families. And so perhaps that's a realistic way to try rolling it out and then broaden it from there. Alternatively, you could sort of assess and evaluate how the family is coping and adjusting initially. But again, I think so much of what, people are experiencing is sometimes hidden. So maybe the way a family is truly coping and adapting is not always visible to us as practitioners. So there might be a danger in only offering that to those families that sort of overtly, expressively appear to be not coping well.
So when you have that plan, is that plan shared with the NICU staff? Because obviously we have different nurses, not all the time your primary nurse is there. Sometimes you don't have a primary nurse. Is this shared with the team?
Yeah, I think that's the vision, is that, I've seen scenarios where, things just we can't expect things to be handed over one shift to the next. I think certain clinical details usually are, in that handover, but like the broad strokes overview of this family and their story and their preferences, those things sometimes get dropped with handovers. And so I think the vision is that this would be created and perhaps it's posted in the room as a highlight to the staff involved. I can think of an example of a family, where, perhaps it's that mom doesn't like to get the calls from the hospital. They just trigger a lot of anxiety when the phone rings, and that she really can't process that medical information. And so she requests that the call initially go to her husband, just as an example. And so that's the type of detail that's then posted, and then it can't get lost, and we can't run into an issue where, and I don't want to be negative on a poor fellow in the middle of the night, but like a fellow in the middle of the night won't know that detail and will call mom, right? So the idea would be to post it.
Okay, we have a question here from Petula. Who is in the NICU who would create the trauma care plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, it's a collaborative process. I could certainly see it being something that falls within the realm of the social work role. Alternatively, I see it happening in a family meeting environment with several members of the care team present. And so working through this with multiple team members in the room. It really depends on your team and sort of the culture and the functioning of each team. But those are a couple ideas.
Okay, so you mentioned trigger before. Do they ever go away? Because obviously NICU parents are traumatized, and you go home and then you have to go back to the hospital, and the smell of the soap or the beeps, the alarms, it can be triggered like years later. So do they ever go away, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I like the smell of the soap. I think that's an interesting example, but I think probably yes and no. I mean, it really depends on your journey and your process towards healing. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong in terms of whether, the impact is lifelong, that there's, you're sort of going back to the scene of the crime, if you will, if you want to put it in the terms of other trauma, right? Like, this is where you were in a very distressing sort of moment in your life. And so in terms of how to manage that, I think I think some of the stuff that Kate mentioned around deep breathing strategies, grounding strategies. So there's a lot of sensory elements to the grounding. What she talked about, like an essential oil or a little perfume bottle or an object that you bring with you that just sort of centers you and grounds you in those moments. I mean, there's a lot out there on the topic of grounding when we feel some of that distress response or trauma stuff resurfacing.
So I think my next question is, how much of those triggers is expected or considered, I hate the word, normal? And when do you feel that families really need to look for help? Or how can we access that you really need help that is not a momentarily trigger, but this is something that is really affecting my everyday life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would look at, I think it's a great question to bring to a trusted care provider, such as a family doctor or, whether it's an obstetrician or someone else that you trust. If you're not sure, right, like it would never hurt to run it by another person. But I would say, if we look at symptoms like nightmares or flashbacks that are pretty persistent or recurring quite frequently, I think you might want to take a closer look at stuff like that. And I think any sort of obsessive types of behaviors or compulsive types of behaviors that are, again, causing you and impacting you in terms of your ability to function in your day-to-day life, then you would probably want to take a look at that. So, a compulsion like, I sanitize my hands before I touch the doorknob, and then after I touch the doorknob, and, before I enter the room and after I enter the room. And it's starting to really impact your capacity to function in your life. And families can access their local resources. Always there's a family, ask the family doctor, social worker in the hospital. There are options out there for families, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And, even if you are functioning in your day-to-day life, but you still want to, process this stuff further, or continue the conversation and just again have a sounding board on that. Like there's so much good therapy support out there, like your COVID cares stuff through the foundation, it being a great example.
Yeah, I'm just sharing the website because we do have a free therapy sessions for families in the NICU and up to a year post-discharge. It's not a crisis line, but it's with psychologists and psychotherapists specialized in perinatal mental health that can really help to find more resources in the community. But Kelly, my last question to you, can we find joy in trauma?
Can we find joy in trauma? I think absolutely yes, right? I think you can simultaneously, have two, and I often say to families too, because we talked earlier about how sometimes practitioners have a discomfort with negative emotion, but sometimes also it's families and mothers themselves, fathers themselves that are just like have a discomfort because they're like, I feel such a darkness or a grief, but like my baby's here. And like, I don't want my baby to absorb this energy. There's a lot of sort of that superstition of like, I can't bring this negative energy into the room, into the unit. I can't really share this. I have to project a sort of a positive, hopeful thing. And so I want people to feel like they can have both things happening simultaneously. I can at once feel a deep grief and fear, and also celebrate, the little micro moments, the small wins, the good days. I think those things can be happening simultaneously.
Absolutely. And I experienced that because I did lose one twin. It was a stillbirth, and I had Gabriel in the ICU for 5 months. So I was experiencing the grief of losing one twin and while celebrating my surviving twin in the ICU, even with all the hiccups that he had, the setbacks during his NICU journey. So yeah, I carried both feelings at the same time. And obviously one day I had to segment them and deal with one at a time to really heal my own grief. So I think we all have different ways of coping and strategies, but I always believe talking to someone, to a professional, is always a great way to really help you to make sense of what is happening or what happened, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's certainly a passion for me, and that's why I love supporting this population in my private practice as a psychotherapist. And I just always want to have supports out there for this population. So I really, I think, keep talking and keep reaching out.
Absolutely. Kelly, I'm sharing your website if somebody wants to be in touch with you. But I really want to thank you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge with us today. And I'm very grateful for all the work that you do for NICU family. So thank you.
Thanks, Fabiana. My great pleasure to be here. Take care.
And for all of you watching us from home or from the hospital on our YouTube channel or Facebook, thank you so much for joining us here today. And if you miss a talk from this week or for the first few talks, the first talk of the day today, you can watch the recordings on our YouTube channel. And next week, they'll be available on our website. I want to thank our sponsors, Medela, Auto Wipes, and Prolacta Bioscience for their ongoing support. And CPBF is a registered charity, and 100% of all donations received this week go to our support programs for families. To donate, please go to CanadianPreemies.org. Together, we can create a brighter future to all premature babies and their families. And tomorrow, we'll be back with Diana Schultz talking about kangaroo care. The next week is a kangaroo care day. So you're going to start this conversation tomorrow. And I will also have Misty Williams joining us from US, discussing evidence-based neonatal skincare practices. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Stay well.